Imagine coming home after a long day of service to your country, only to have your own driveway transformed into a crime scene by a man who claimed he was protecting the neighborhood. That's exactly what happened to FBI Tactical Commander Danielle Rivers, a woman trained to lead high-risk operations who had stared down armed fugitives, infiltrated criminal networks, and negotiated in life-or-death standoffs. But on this night, none of that mattered. What unfolded outside her home would shake not only her but an entire community to its core. The night had been long already. Danielle had just left the Sacramento FBI field office, where strategy sessions stretched late into the evening. The weight of tactical reports, follow-ups, and debriefs still circled in her mind. She was tired, but it was the familiar exhaustion of service, the kind she carried proudly. Driving down the dimly lit road toward Fairgrove Estates, a gated neighborhood in Elk Grove, she expected the quiet of home, the comfort of silence. But peace wasn't waiting for her. Fear was. As Danielle's SUV turned off the main road and into the neighborhood's entrance, her headlights swept across houses that looked identical, cookie-cutter designs, pristine lawns, garden lights flickering faintly. The kind of place where everyone smiled during the day but whispered at night, where safety was a badge worn more as pride than as practice. From the shadows of a porch across the street, a figure shifted. His name was Gregory Harlan, the head of the Homeowners Association's Security Committee. To his neighbors, Gregory was the self-proclaimed watchdog. Always pacing, always watching, always suspicious of outsiders. What most didn't realize was that his obsession with safety was driven less by community care and more by paranoia. Danielle parked her SUV in front of her own driveway. She reached over to grab her work bag, still thinking about tomorrow's agenda, unaware that Gregory's eyes had already locked on her, narrowing with suspicion. Another stranger in the neighborhood, he muttered under his breath. He didn't see the house key in her hand. He didn't see the badge in her bag. He didn't see the neighbor he had passed countless times before. All Gregory saw was what he chose to see. A black woman in a neighborhood he believed needed protection. Gregory moved quickly, hands slipping to the holster under his jacket. The cool steel of his pistol brushed his palm, and with it came the illusion of control. He stepped into the street, planting himself in front of Danielle's car as though he were the law itself. Danielle noticed him instantly, her instincts never rested. At first, she thought it might be a neighbor in need, someone approaching to ask for help. But the stiffness in his stance, the aggression in his eyes, and then the flash of metal. Gregory's gun was out. The night air turned electric. Danielle froze, not in fear, but in calculation. She had faced down AK-47s in raids, had ordered her team into gunfire, had kept her composure when lives hung by a thread. But this moment was different. This was her neighborhood, her driveway, and the man pointing the gun wasn't a criminal in hiding. It was the man who claimed to be protecting her street. "Excuse me," Gregory barked, his voice loud, shaky with adrenaline. "This is private property. Who are you? What are you doing here?" Danielle slowly lowered her window, her movements calm, deliberate. She had learned long ago that the wrong gesture could ignite violence. Her voice, steady yet firm, cut through the tense air. "I live here," she said. "House number 24. But Gregory didn't lower his weapon. His eyes darted between her face and her hands, mistrust thick in his expression. He saw her skin before he heard her words. He saw a threat where there was none. Danielle raised her hands in plain sight, palms open, her heart steady despite the danger. She spoke again, her tone carrying the weight of authority. "Sir, put the gun down. You're making a mistake." Gregory's finger trembled on the trigger. The entire cul-de-sac seemed to hold its breath. A dog barked in the distance. Sprinklers hissed faintly. But between Danielle and Gregory, the world had gone silent. The bitter irony of the moment was not lost on Danielle. Here she was, a decorated commander who had led men into battlefields of crime, staring down the barrel of a suburban paranoia. She had sworn to protect the nation from threats foreign and domestic. Yet tonight, the threat was standing a few feet away, fueled by fear, armed by prejudice, wrapped in the false authority of a neighborhood title. The quiet street was no longer quiet. It had become an arena of power and fear, of truth and illusion. And before the night was over, every neighbor on that block would learn the devastating cost of mistaking suspicion for security. Danielle's pulse quickened, but her mind was sharp. She knew what came next could define not only her night but her very life. The gun didn't move. The weight of Gregory's fear hung thick in the night air, pressing against Danielle's calm like an immovable wall. Her training told her to de-escalate, to control her breathing, to keep her hands visible and her words measured. But even as she carefully chose her next move, she could feel the neighborhood itself beginning to stir. A curtain slid open 2 houses down, the faint glow of a television flickering behind it. Across the street, a porch light blinked on. The stillness of the cul-de-sac was fracturing, curiosity beginning to seep through the cracks of silence. The sight of Gregory Harlan, head of the HOA's security committee, standing in the middle of the street with a gun drawn was impossible to ignore. "Step out of the vehicle," Gregory ordered, his voice cracking just slightly under the weight of his own nerves. Danielle's jaw tightened. She had led hostage negotiations with men far more dangerous than Gregory, but there was something uniquely volatile about this moment. He wasn't a hardened criminal who understood the stakes of life and death. He was a fearful man, wielding power he hadn't earned, convinced that his suspicion was justification enough to aim a weapon at his neighbor. She kept her voice even, unshaken. "Sir, this is my home. I am not getting out of this car while you're pointing a firearm at me. Lower the weapon." But Gregory only stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the hood of her SUV. The glint of his gun caught the streetlight, sharp and menacing. "I don't recognize you," he said through clenched teeth. "You don't belong here." Danielle's heart thudded in her chest, but she forced her breathing to remain steady. Her every word carried 2 purposes: survival and control. "Gregory, my name is Danielle Rivers. I live here. House 24. I've walked by you countless times. Think, you know me." For the first time, a flicker of doubt passed across Gregory's face. His grip loosened, then tightened again. Doubt was dangerous. Doubt could trigger panic, and panic could make his finger twitch. And then came another voice. "Greg, what's going on?" It was a neighbor, stepping onto their porch, robe pulled tight against the evening air. Within moments, more faces appeared, heads peeking from behind blinds, silhouettes gathering under doorframes. The perfect stillness of Fairgrove Estates was gone, replaced by the anxious buzz of a neighborhood waking up to a scene they never expected. The man who had insisted on keeping their streets safe, now pointing a gun at one of their own. Danielle's mind raced. Every second the weapon stayed trained on her, the odds of catastrophe grew. She needed Gregory to put it down before someone called the police, before lights and sirens escalated this beyond control. "Gregory," she said softly, deliberately lowering her voice to a near whisper. "You think you're protecting this community, but right now you're endangering it. You're endangering me, and you're endangering yourself. Put the gun down." Her calm was unnerving. Gregory's chest heaved with shallow breaths, his body trembling with the pressure of being the self-appointed hero of the night. And then, as though on cue, a child's voice called out from the crowd gathering at a distance. "Mom, why does Mr. Harlan have a gun?" The words cut through the tension like a knife. Whispers rose, neighbors murmuring among themselves. They weren't sure who was right, but they could see clearly who was wrong. Danielle sat still, her hands raised in plain sight. Gregory, in contrast, looked increasingly like a man unraveling under the weight of his own paranoia. Danielle could feel the tide turning, but she also knew tides didn't always bring safety. Sometimes they pulled everything under. She needed to stay sharp, to balance every move between defiance and restraint. Her instincts screamed at her to disarm him, her training made it possible. In a single motion, she could end the threat. But to do so here, in front of neighbors, in front of children, in front of people who didn't know her full story, could spark chaos she couldn't control. So she waited. She let the silence grow heavy again, filling the space between Gregory's trembling gun and her unwavering composure. The neighbors' whispers grew louder. One man shouted from across the street, "Greg, put it down, man. That's enough." But Gregory didn't listen. He doubled down, his voice rising with desperation. "You don't understand. People like her don't belong here. I'm protecting you all." The words fell like poison across the crowd. Gasps echoed. A woman shook her head, pulling her child close. For the first time, Gregory's mask slipped completely, and his fear bled into prejudice for everyone to see. Danielle's eyes locked onto his. Her voice, sharp yet compassionate, cut through the murmurs. "Gregory, listen to yourself. You're not protecting anyone. You're about to destroy everything. Put the gun down before you cross a line you can't come back from." The street was no longer just watching. It was judging, and Gregory could feel it. His hand shook harder, his stance faltering. Danielle stayed perfectly still, waiting, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. And just as the air seemed too thick to breathe, red and blue lights flared in the distance. The police were coming. The sound came first, the rising wail of sirens tearing through the quiet of Fairgrove Estates. Neighbors who had stepped outside now froze, caught between relief and dread. Porch lights flickered on up and down the block. The suburban stillness now lit up like a stage. And in the center of it all stood Gregory Harlan. Gun still drawn, trembling. His face pale with the realization that the world was closing in. Danielle sat motionless, her hands raised, her training keeping her composed. She could already anticipate what was about to unfold. She had seen it too many times before, not here in her own neighborhood but across the country. The police would arrive, they would see a black woman in a tense standoff, and the narrative Gregory spun in those first seconds could decide everything. The patrol cars screeched to a stop, red and blue lights flooding the street. Two officers jumped out, weapons drawn, their shouts piercing the night. "Step away from the vehicle. Hands where we can see them." Danielle exhaled slowly. Of course, the guns weren't pointed at Gregory. They were pointed at her. From across the street, a chorus of voices rose up. "It's not her," one woman yelled. "She's the one in danger." Another neighbor waved his arms frantically. "The guy with the gun. Look at him." But Gregory was faster. He raised his voice, loud, authoritative, desperate to seize control of the story. "Officers, thank God you're here. She doesn't belong in this neighborhood. She tried to force her way in." The lie rolled off his tongue with ease, his fear transforming into performance. And for a chilling second, the officers looked at Danielle as if his words held weight. Her pulse quickened, but her voice remained calm, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had faced chaos before. "Officers," she said firmly, "my name is Danielle Rivers. I live here, House 24. I am a tactical commander with the FBI. This man has pulled a gun on me in my own driveway." The words cut through the tension like steel, but still the officers hesitated. Their weapons wavered, their eyes darting between Danielle's steady posture and Gregory's frantic performance. Gregory seized the moment, pointing at her with his free hand while keeping the gun dangerously close to firing position. "She's lying. People like her don't belong here. I've never seen her before in my life." His words were cut short by the gasp of a neighbor. "Greg, stop. Everyone knows Danielle. She lives here." More voices joined in. The street erupted with protest, neighbors shouting over one another, some defending Danielle, others frozen with fear, unsure what to believe. Children clung to their parents, wide-eyed, witnessing a nightmare unraveling before them. Danielle's voice sliced through the chaos. She lowered her tone, steady and commanding, speaking not just to the officers but to the whole crowd. "Check the records. Run my plates. My name is Danielle Rivers, and I do not need to justify my right to be here. But I will not allow this man to keep pointing a firearm at me." Her words carried the unmistakable weight of truth. One of the officers, a younger man with uncertainty written across his face, slowly lowered his weapon. He moved toward his squad car, radioing in for verification. But the older officer remained locked in place, his aim still fixed on Danielle. his hesitation revealing the bias he hadn't spoken aloud. Gregory's gun shook violently now, the barrel still trained on Danielle. Sweat ran down his temple. His authority was crumbling in real time, and he knew it. "You don't get it," Gregory shouted, his voice cracking. "She doesn't belong. If you don't act now, she'll—" But before he could finish, a firm voice rang out from the crowd. "Greg, enough!" It was Mrs. Alvarez, the elderly woman who lived directly across from Danielle. She stepped forward, her cane tapping against the pavement, her eyes fierce. "I've seen her every morning for 3 years. She lives here. She works for the government. And you've terrorized this street long enough." The street fell silent. The officers glanced at one another. Gregory's jaw tightened, his entire facade crumbling. And in that silence, Danielle spoke again, her words like stone. "Officers, if you do not disarm him immediately, this neighborhood will not just witness a tragedy. It will live with the memory of a preventable injustice." The younger officer's voice broke the tension. "Dispatch confirms. Danielle Rivers, resident of Fairgrove Estates. FBI Tactical Commander." The confirmation hit the street like a lightning bolt. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Danielle remained perfectly still, her hands raised, her gaze locked on Gregory. But Gregory didn't lower his weapon. If anything, the truth only made him more dangerous. The confirmation should have ended it. Every eye in the neighborhood had shifted. Every whisper had turned into a gasp when the dispatch came back. "Danielle Rivers, resident, FBI Tactical Commander." It was the kind of truth no one could deny, the kind of fact that stripped Gregory's accusations bare. But instead of surrender, instead of relief, the revelation only pushed Gregory deeper into his paranoia. His gun trembled wildly now, the barrel weaving in uneven arcs that made the crowd flinch with every movement. Sweat soaked his collar, his lips quivered, but his voice grew louder as he doubled down. "Don't listen to them. She's lying. Don't you see? This is what they do. They infiltrate, they pretend." His words stumbled, tangled in desperation, but the gun spoke louder than his voice. Every second it stayed raised was a second closer to tragedy. Danielle remained perfectly still, her FBI training locking her in place like steel. She had stood in standoffs before, but this one carried a different weight. This wasn't a criminal across state lines. This was her neighbor. A man who mowed his lawn on Sundays, waved at passing cars, and now pointed a weapon at her head in front of half the community. She spoke low, her tone designed for him alone, though every ear strained to catch it. "Gregory, you're unraveling. Everyone sees it. The only way this ends without your life collapsing is if you put that gun down now." The crowd shifted nervously. A young mother whispered to her husband, "Why isn't anyone stopping him?" Another man muttered, "Because if they rush him, someone dies." The officers, weapons still drawn, hesitated like statues caught between duty and doubt. Gregory's breathing grew erratic, each inhale sharp, each exhale ragged. His sense of control, the fragile power he had clung to for years as the self-appointed guardian of Fairgrove Estates, was slipping through his fingers. And everyone could see it. "Greg," Mrs. Alvarez called again, her voice strong despite her frail frame. "Listen to yourself. You're humiliating yourself. You're hurting this community." But Gregory wasn't listening anymore. His world had narrowed to Danielle, the calm, steady figure who refused to flinch, who refused to bow to his authority. To him, she wasn't just Danielle Rivers. She was every threat he had imagined in the shadows, every fear he had inflated in his mind, every lie he had told himself about who belonged and who didn't. And that made her dangerous in a way truth alone couldn't undo. Danielle sensed it. She adjusted her posture ever so slightly, leaning into her training. Her voice carried across the street, steady, precise, leaving no space for misinterpretation. "Gregory Harlan, I am commanding you. Put the weapon down." The officers glanced at her, startled by the sudden shift in tone. It wasn't a plea anymore. It was a command, authoritative, practiced, unmistakably rooted in her role as a tactical leader. For a flicker of a second, Gregory froze, as though the authority in her voice cut through the fog of his fear. His hand wavered, the barrel dipping slightly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Maybe this was the moment. Maybe he would surrender. But then a shout broke through the tension. "Daddy!" Every head turned. At the edge of the street, a teenage girl stood, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with horror. Gregory's daughter. She had slipped out from one of the houses, her hands trembling as she clutched the frame of the gate. Tears streamed down her face. "Daddy, please!" she cried. "Stop. You're scaring everyone. You're scaring me." The sound hit Gregory harder than any command could. His arm faltered, his knees buckled slightly, his face twisted between rage and shame. For the first time that night, he looked less like a man in control and more like a man exposed. His fear naked, his authority crumbling. Danielle seized the moment. She leaned forward, her voice softer now, almost maternal, yet razor-sharp with purpose. "Gregory, look at your daughter. Do you want her to remember you like this? Do you want her last image of you to be with your finger on a trigger, surrounded by neighbors who are terrified of you?" Gregory's lips parted, but no words came out. His daughter's sobs filled the silence, echoing louder than any accusation or defense could. The neighbors watched, frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on every soul in the street. The younger officer stepped forward cautiously, lowering his weapon slightly, his voice calm. "Greg, end this now. Put it down before someone gets hurt." But Gregory's pride, his paranoia, his desperation, all warred within him. His hand shook violently, the gun dangling dangerously. He looked at Danielle, at the officers, at the crowd, at his daughter, and for the first time he realized the power he thought he held was gone. Danielle's eyes never left his. "You are not the protector of this neighborhood tonight. You are the threat. The only way to change that is to lower the weapon. Do it for her." The silence was deafening. Every breath held, every heartbeat pounding. And then Gregory's hand finally dipped. The gun lowered, inch by inch, until it pointed at the pavement. His arm quivered, his chest heaved, and the sound of his daughter's sob broke him completely. The crowd exhaled collectively, the tension unraveling just slightly. But Danielle didn't move, not yet. She knew too well that even a disarmed man could be dangerous until the weapon was truly out of his hands. "Put it on the ground, Gregory," she commanded. His hand trembled, then finally, with a clatter that echoed through the night, the gun hit the asphalt. The breaking point had come, and with it the fragile possibility of peace. But Danielle knew this night was far from over. The gun lay on the pavement, its metallic echo still vibrating in the ears of everyone present. For a moment, the entire cul-de-sac stood frozen in stunned silence. No one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was Gregory's labored breathing and the muffled sobs of his daughter, who stood at the edge of the street, her hands covering her face. Danielle didn't lower her hands immediately. She kept her body still, her training reminding her that disarmament didn't mean safety. Too many times she had seen suspects lunge for their weapons again, driven by pride, desperation, or the fear of losing control. She held her posture with precision, her voice sharp enough to slice through the lingering tension. "Officers," she said, her tone firm but controlled. "Secure the weapon. Now." The younger officer obeyed first, stepping forward carefully, his eyes never leaving Gregory as he crouched down and slid the gun across the asphalt with his boot before scooping it up. He cleared the chamber, pocketed the magazine, and finally holstered the firearm in an evidence bag. Only then did Danielle slowly lower her arms, her muscles burning from the tension of holding them raised for so long. Gregory stood trembling, his hands dangling uselessly at his sides. The authority he had wrapped around himself like armor was gone, stripped away in front of the very community he claimed to protect. His eyes darted to the faces of his neighbors, searching for sympathy, but found only stares, some angry, some disappointed, some filled with pity. His daughter's voice broke the silence again, raw with pain. "Why, Daddy? Why would you do that?" The words cut deeper than any reprimand could. Gregory flinched, his jaw tightening, but no explanation came. What could he say? That he had convinced himself his prejudice was duty? That his fear had grown into violence? The truth was etched on his face for everyone to see. Danielle finally stepped out of her vehicle, moving slowly, deliberately, her posture radiating authority even in her exhaustion. The crowd instinctively gave her space, parting as though she carried a shield invisible to the eye. She walked to the center of the street, her gaze never leaving Gregory. "I have spent my career facing armed criminals," she said, her voice loud enough for every neighbor to hear. "I've led teams into situations most people couldn't imagine. But never, not once, did I expect to have a gun pointed at me in my own neighborhood. By the man who was supposed to represent its safety." The words struck the crowd like thunder. Murmurs rippled. Eyes darted between Danielle and Gregory. Some nodded in agreement, others simply lowered their heads in shame that it had come to this. Gregory opened his mouth, but Danielle cut him off, her tone sharp as steel. "You didn't see a threat tonight. You saw me, and you decided that was enough." His daughter sobbed harder, her knees buckling as she sank to the curb. A neighbor rushed to comfort her, while others muttered disapprovingly, their faith in Gregory collapsing under the weight of the truth. The older officer finally stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Ma'am, Commander Rivers, I think we should take your statement inside, away from all this." But Danielle didn't move. She wasn't finished, not yet. The weight of what had just unfolded couldn't be swept away with paperwork and protocol. Her neighbors needed to hear it. Gregory needed to hear it. "This is what fear does," she said, her eyes scanning every face in the street. "It twists judgment, corrodes trust. It makes a man point a gun at someone he's known for years, because he chose to see difference as danger. Tonight could have ended with a bullet. And the only reason it didn't is because I have been trained to face fear and not let it control me. But most people don't get that chance. Most people don't survive." The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. Parents pulled their children closer, neighbors shifted uncomfortably, and Gregory stood small, exposed, powerless. The younger officer placed a hand on Gregory's shoulder. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with us." Gregory stiffened. "You can't be serious. I was protecting the community?" "Protecting?" Danielle's voice cut sharp as glass. "You endangered every soul on this street tonight, including your own child. That is not protection. That is recklessness." The officer tightened his grip. Gregory's protests grew weaker, his words faltering as the reality of his downfall finally settled in. He was no longer the self-appointed hero of Fairgrove Estates. He was a man being led away in shame, his neighbors' stares burning into him like flames. As the officers escorted him toward the patrol car, Danielle turned back toward the crowd. Her expression softened, her voice lowering with empathy. "This is not just about me. This is about all of us. Fear cannot be the foundation of our safety, because when it is, safety becomes a weapon turned against the very people it's supposed to protect." The words hung in the air like a solemn oath. For the first time all night, the neighbors didn't just watch, they listened. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the flashing lights and the heavy silence, the first hint of dawn began to glow. The street was bathed in the cold blue and red pulse of police lights. Fairgrove Estates, normally quiet enough to hear sprinklers clicking at night, now looked like a stage set for tragedy. Neighbors still stood frozen in driveways and front yards, some clutching robes tighter against the chill, others holding phones mid-air, uncertain whether to record or put them away out of respect. The night had been cracked open, and no one knew how to seal it shut again. Gregory's wrists were pulled behind him, the metallic click of handcuffs echoing in the silence. The younger officer read him his rights, the words steady and rehearsed, but they sounded strange against the backdrop of a suburban cul-de-sac where HOA meetings usually ended with arguments about lawn heights and trash cans left out too long. "Gregory Miles, you are under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon." "No!" Gregory shouted, his face reddening, veins standing out against his temples. "This isn't right. I was protecting this community. She doesn't belong here." The officer's grip tightened. "Sir, you need to remain silent." Gregory struggled, but only weakly. His energy was draining fast, leaving him slumped against the hood of the patrol car. The weight of the stairs around him pressed harder than the cuffs themselves. He had built his image in this neighborhood for years. A man who enforced order, who stood watch, who knew everyone's business. But now, with flashing lights painting him in harsh colors, his empire of fear collapsed. From the crowd, an older woman whispered, her voice trembling. He could have killed her. Danielle heard it, and though she stood tall, her chest ached with the heaviness of what had almost happened. She had faced cartel gunmen in Mexican border towns, bank robbers in Los Angeles, and armed militias in rural standoffs. But never had she been one breath away from dying at the hands of a man who lived 3 doors down. Her training told her to compartmentalize. Keep emotions boxed. Focus on procedure. But standing there, looking at Gregory's daughter sobbing against a neighbor's shoulder, Danielle couldn't escape the thought. Trauma doesn't end when the weapon is lowered. Trauma lingers. It roots itself in children, in communities, in the fragile sense of trust that holds people together. The older officer approached her. Commander Rivers, we'll need you to come down to the station to file an official statement. But, are you sure you're okay? Danielle nodded. I'm fine. But she wasn't. Inside, she was split in two. One part of her, the soldier, the tactician, was cold, unshaken, almost mechanical. That part assessed Gregory's threat level, calculated distances, predicted outcomes, and kept her alive. But the other part, the neighbor, the human being, was trembling. That part saw Gregory's rage not as a tactical problem but as a betrayal. She remembered block parties where Gregory grilled burgers, holiday parades where he waved the HOA flag, neighborhood emails where he ranted about suspicious outsiders. Back then, Danielle had brushed it off as arrogance. Tonight, arrogance had bared its teeth and aimed a trigger at her chest. Gregory's daughter suddenly broke away from the woman holding her. She ran toward her father, only to be stopped by the officer. Her small hands reached out, desperate. Daddy, please, don't take him away. Gregory twisted, eyes glassy with a cocktail of shame and stubbornness. Go home, sweetheart. Daddy will fix this. They can't keep me. Danielle's throat tightened. That girl would remember this night for the rest of her life. She would remember her father not as a protector but as a man shackled in front of flashing lights. A man who chose fear over love. Danielle stepped closer, lowering her voice to the girl's level. He made a mistake, she said gently. And when people make mistakes, they have to face them. But you are not responsible for this. You did nothing wrong. The girl looked at her with wide, tear-filled eyes. For a moment, Danielle saw her younger self, the daughter of a military father who was always gone, who left her to learn early what fear felt like. The officers began guiding Gregory toward the back seat of the patrol car. His protests grew faint, strangled under the weight of inevitability. Neighbors whispered, their faces a mixture of judgment and unease. Some looked relieved, others horrified. The thin fabric of their community had been torn wide open, and no one knew how to stitch it back. Danielle turned back toward the crowd. You all saw what happened here, she said firmly. Don't pretend you didn't. Tonight wasn't just about a gun. It was about silence. About how we let fear grow unchecked until it nearly destroyed us. Her eyes locked on several neighbors who had always looked the other way when Gregory hurled barbed words at those who didn't look like him. They shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her gaze. If we want this place to be safe, she continued, her voice softer now, then safety has to mean justice. It has to mean trust. Otherwise, it's just another weapon. The silence deepened. This time, it wasn't avoidance, it was reflection. The older officer cleared his throat. Commander, we should go. We'll need to process this tonight. Danielle gave one final look at the neighborhood, her neighborhood, and nodded. She walked toward her SUV, shoulders squared, but her heart carried the weight of every stare, every whisper, every shadow of doubt that had taken root in Fairgrove Estates long before tonight. The patrol car door slammed shut on Gregory, sealing his fall from self-proclaimed guardian to exposed aggressor. For Danielle, though, the night wasn't over. Her fight had shifted from survival to reckoning. And as the sirens carried Gregory away into the distance, Danielle realized this wasn't just his trial. It was the community's. The precinct was quiet, but not in the comforting way libraries are quiet. It was the kind of quiet that pressed in heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The fluorescent lights hummed above Danielle, casting long shadows across the interview table where she sat. A legal pad rested in front of her, blank but waiting, the pen poised like a test she wasn't sure she wanted to take. She'd filled out hundreds of reports in her career, after raids, after rescues, after operations that ended in triumph or tragedy. Each report had its structure, its sterile checkboxes and clinical lines, a system designed to strip away emotion and leave only facts. But tonight, the facts felt heavier than usual. Because tonight, she wasn't just an FBI commander documenting a suspect's actions. Tonight, she was a black woman forced to relive how a neighbor had nearly killed her simply for existing where she lived. Across the table, Detective Ramirez, the officer assigned to take her statement, cleared his throat. He was younger, early 30s, eyes weary but sympathetic. He slid the form toward her. "When you're ready, Commander." Danielle picked up the pen, fingers tightening around it. She wrote slowly at first, each word deliberate. "I exited my vehicle. I was approached by Gregory Miles. He drew a firearm. He issued verbal threats. I identified myself. He refused compliance. Tactical assessment. Intent to harm." The words looked clinical, detached. They told the story, but not the truth. The truth was in her heartbeat pounding in her ears, in the way her daughter's laughter had flashed through her mind in the second she thought she'd never see her again. But the form had no box for that. No checkbox for fear. Detective Ramirez leaned forward. "If you want to dictate instead of writing, I can record." Danielle shook her head. "No. All right." She pressed harder, filling the page with every step of the encounter. And with each sentence, she felt the clash inside her. The FBI commander trained to stay objective, and the woman who wanted to scream he pointed a gun at me because of the color of my skin. When she finished, she set the pen down. Ramirez picked up the paper, scanning it carefully. His brow furrowed, but he didn't speak right away. Finally, he looked up. "Commander, off the record, if you weren't who you are, if you weren't in that uniform, I don't think you'd be sitting here alive." The words hit harder than any bullet. Danielle didn't flinch, but her chest tightened. She'd known it already, of course. Known it from experience, from headlines, from the names of people who weren't given the chance to defend themselves. But hearing it aloud, spoken in a police station, stripped of denial, it burned. She leaned back in her chair, eyes drifting toward the ceiling. That's the part one can't put in the report. The door opened, and two familiar figures entered. Agents Morales and Chen, colleagues from the Sacramento field office. Their faces were drawn tight with worry. Morales was the first to speak. "Danielle, we came as soon as we heard. Are you okay?" She gave a half smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm alive." Chen's fists clenched. "We're not letting this slide. HOA board member or not, this man. It's not just about him," Danielle interrupted, her tone calm but heavy. "It's about all the people who stood by while he built his little kingdom of fear. The neighbors who nodded when he said outsiders didn't belong. The silence that fed him." Morales exchanged a look with Chun, then sat across from her. "So what do you want to do?" Danielle exhaled slowly. The question was bigger than tonight. Bigger than Gregory. She thought about the girl crying for her father, about the neighbors who couldn't meet her gaze, about the fact that safety in America too often depended on the accident of your skin color or your badge. "I'll give my statement," she said firmly, "and then I'll do what I've always done. Fight. But this time not just against men with guns. Against the culture that arms them with hate long before they ever pull a trigger." The room fell into silence again. Not the suffocating silence of fear this time, but the silence of truth laid bare. Ramirez finally broke it. "Commander, I'll file this. You should go home, rest. But thank you for not staying silent." Danielle gathered her things, but as she rose, Morales touched her arm gently. You know, Danielle, this story is going to get out. People are going to know who you are now, not just as an FBI commander, but as the woman who stood in her driveway and faced down prejudice with nothing but truth. And that matters. She met his eyes, her voice steady. Then let them know, because silence won't save us anymore. As she walked out of the station into the crisp Sacramento night, she realized something. The battle wasn't over. It was only beginning. The morning sun broke over Fairgrove Estates like any other, gilding manicured lawns and sparkling across SUV windshields. But the calm was a lie. By 8 a.m., news vans lined the once quiet cul-de-sac, satellite dishes towering like metallic sunflowers, reporters clutching microphones, their voices urgent and clipped. The story had spread overnight. HOA security draws gun on black FBI commander in her own driveway. The community, once defined by its gates and hedges, was now defined by whispers. Neighbors peered from behind blinds, torn between curiosity and fear. Some gathered in hushed clusters on sidewalks, murmuring excuses. Gregory just made a mistake. Others shook their heads in shame, unwilling to defend the man who had ruled them through fear and paperwork. Inside the HOA clubhouse, the remaining board members sat around a long oak table, their faces pale. The president, a woman named Linda with carefully coiffed hair and trembling hands, tapped a stack of papers against the desk. This is a nightmare. Do you realize what this does to our reputation? To property values? A younger member, glasses slipping down his nose, whispered back. It's not the reputation that matters. It's that a man nearly killed his neighbor because she was black. Linda's lips tightened. You think the cameras out there care about nuance? They want a villain, and Gregory gave them one. And by extension, us. Across town, at a coffee shop that Danielle sometimes stopped at after morning runs, a TV flickered with live coverage. Patrons sat silent, eyes fixed on the screen where grainy footage rolled. Danielle, in her FBI jacket, standing calm but firm in front of the flashing lights of squad cars. A cheer screamed across the bottom. FBI commander targeted by HOA gunmen. On social media, hashtags trended within hours, hashtag justice for Danielle, hashtag HOA accountability, hashtag safety not skin color. Voices from across the country weighed in. Activists demanding reform, veterans denouncing Gregory as a coward, parents sharing their fears for children growing up in gated communities that promised safety but harbored danger. By noon, Danielle's phone buzzed relentlessly. Texts from colleagues, calls from journalists, voicemails from people she hadn't spoken to in years. She ignored most, but one caught her eye. A message from her daughter's school. We've had news vans outside since morning. We're keeping her safe inside until pickup. Danielle's hand tightened around the phone. Even here, even now, the storm touched every corner of her life. That evening, under pressure from the bureau and her own conscience, she stepped onto the porch of her home. A crowd had gathered. Neighbors, reporters, cameras clicking like the wings of restless birds. She wore no uniform tonight, only a plain blue sweater, her badge tucked away. She raised her hand for silence. The hum subsided. My name is Commander Danielle Rivers, she began, her voice steady but resonant. And 3 nights ago I was nearly killed in my own driveway. Not by a stranger, not by someone from outside these gates, but by a man who lived among us. A man who saw my skin before he saw my humanity. The crowd shifted uneasily. A child's cry rang faintly in the back, quickly hushed. I survived because I am trained, because I had the presence of mind to de-escalate. But I should not have had to. No one should have to. She scanned the faces, catching the eyes of neighbors who couldn't look away now. Safety is not a privilege. It's a right. And it cannot depend on what neighborhood you live in, or what color your skin is, or what badge you carry. Her words fell heavy, but they did not break. They carried. And to those watching, she added, her gaze lifting to the cameras. Let this be a moment we don't forget in tomorrow's headlines. Let it be the moment we decide that fear cannot be policy, and hate cannot be law. The silence after was profound, broken only by the shuffling of reporters. Danielle nodded once, then stepped back inside, her door closing softly against the storm outside. Subscribe CTA, woven into the narrative as the news cycle burned brighter. Her story reached living rooms across America. And for those listening right now, this story is only one of many that reveal what's happening in our neighborhoods, behind the gates, under the guise of safety. If you believe stories like Danielle's deserve to be heard, if you want truth and justice pulled into the light, then click subscribe. Stay with us, because voices like hers are too important to fade into silence. The days after Danielle's porch address blurred into a whirlwind of cameras, microphones, and headlines. National anchors dissected every frame of body cam footage, commentators argued about gated communities, and civil rights leaders invoked her name in speeches about systemic fear. Gregory was arrested, charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, and hate-motivated intimidation. His mugshot, stone-faced, eyes hollow, circulated online, a stark contrast to the iron-fisted authority he once wielded as protector of Fairgrove Estates. The HOA board, under immense pressure, dissolved within a week. Lawsuits were filed. Residents debated late into the night in kitchen conversations. Were we complicit? Did we ignore the warning signs? For many, the illusion of their safe haven had shattered. But while the world outside argued, Danielle lived in the quiet aftershocks. One evening, a week later, she walked the same driveway where the confrontation had nearly ended her life. The air was cool, cicadas chirping in the distance, the street oddly still. She paused by the patch of asphalt where the memory lived, the spot where Gregory had raised his weapon, where her training had saved her life. She closed her eyes. The images came back, unbidden but vivid. The glint of the gun, the sharp command to raise her hands, the sudden silence before she spoke. But woven through the memory was another image. Her daughter's face when she came home safe that night, when the front door closed and arms wrapped around her waist. That image steadied her. Later, she sat at her kitchen table with a notebook open. Across its lined pages, she began to write. Not reports, not statements for the bureau, but reflections. Her pen moved slowly, steadily, forming words that weren't meant for courtrooms or cameras, but for herself. I was trained for danger in hostile places. I never expected it at my doorstep. Yet I survived. And survival isn't enough. My daughter deserves more. My neighbors deserve more. My country deserves more. If fear is policy, then love must be resistance. And if silence is safety, then I choose to speak. She set down the pen, exhaling deeply. For the first time since that night, the weight lifted, if only slightly. The following Sunday, she did something ordinary. She took her daughter to the park. No cameras followed this time, no neighbors whispered. Just laughter, just sunlight, just a mother pushing her child on the swings, choosing joy despite the shadow of fear. A group of children ran past, their voices bright and unburdened. Danielle smiled. She knew the fight wasn't over. Prejudice rarely surrendered after one arrest, one headline. But she also knew something else. Survival wasn't just about training. It was about hope, about living fully, even when the world tried to narrow your existence into fear. As they walked back to the car, her daughter slipped her small hand into Danielle's. "Mommy?" she asked softly. "Are we safe now?" Danielle squeezed her hand. "We're safer," she said, her voice warm but firm. "Because we're not alone." That night, as the stars spilled across the Sacramento sky, Danielle stood at her window, gazing past the gates of Fairgrove Estates. Beyond those gates, the world was still complicated, still flawed, still in need of change. But it was also a world worth fighting for. And that was the truth she carried, not as a commander, not as a victim, but as a mother, a neighbor, a woman who refused to be defined by fear. Her story had started in silence, in the quiet turn of a key in her driveway. But it ended here, with a voice that would not be silenced again. If this story stays with you, let it be more than just a headline. Let it remind us that safety without justice is just an illusion, and communities are only as strong as the compassion they practice. Danielle's courage is not just her own. It belongs to everyone who chooses to stand, to speak, to resist fear with truth.